The alien princess was on the brink of death, until a human doctor did what no one else dared. On a cold winter night, the emergency room in New York City felt like a place far away from the stars. Its hallways, lit by harsh fluorescent lights, echoed with the relentless beeping of monitors and the hurried footsteps of staff. A constant urgency hung in the air. This was where Dr. Ethan Harris, an emergency physician, spent his long nights working tirelessly to save lives in a city that never slept. Ethan never imagined that on a night like any other, his world would change forever. The case he was about to face was unlike anything he'd seen before, not just because of the severity of the situation, but because of the very nature of the patient. The emergency room door slammed open, bringing with it a sight that made Ethan's heart race and his mind spin. A woman, or what appeared to be a woman, was rushed in by a team of paramedics. She was unconscious, her skin pale, almost translucent, with hair as white as snow. Her eyes were closed, but Ethan knew there was something beyond human comprehension before him. This wasn't the first time he'd treated severe injuries. He'd seen everything from car accidents to overdoses, but the patient on his table was different. She was otherworldly. Her features, though human in shape, radiated an ethereal beauty, paired with a fragility that defied logic. What unsettled him most was the strange aura surrounding her lifeless body. The air around her crackled, charged as if something beyond human life was at work within her. Ethan had been called for a special case, but he had no idea what that truly meant. The paramedics had been quick with their explanation. She was found in the middle of the Nevada desert, apparently fallen from a ship. We have very little information. She doesn't respond to stimuli. She seems not human. The first thing Ethan did was check if her heart was still beating. His adrenaline surged as his fingers touched her cold skin. It was firm, yet strangely lifeless, like she could slip away at any moment. "What's happening to you?" Ethan whispered to himself, more out of desperate need for answers than anything else. He adjusted the equipment around her, hooking her up to machines to monitor blood pressure and heart function. Nothing felt normal. Her body seemed somehow out of time. The scars and burn marks on her skin told stories of unimaginable horrors, things no human should ever endure. But when his eyes fell again on her white hair, cascading softly over the pillow with an almost supernatural lightness, something inside him broke. She wasn't just a patient. There was something in her presence that made his heart beat faster, enveloping him in a sense of urgency, as if everyone's fate was tied to this very moment. "Who are you?" Ethan thought, desperately searching for answers. But before he could find any rational explanation, the heart monitor emitted a strange beep, and the woman on his table moved. Ethan's heart jumped. She was alive. She opened her eyes, and he saw something he never expected. Her eyes were a deep, intense blue, like the sky of a distant world. He didn't know what to do or how to act. His medical instincts told him to keep her alive, but there was something in her gaze that wasn't human. Something deeply alien. Ethan's perception was a mix of fear and fascination. An unusual feeling, something beyond his control, flooded his chest. He was facing an alien princess, and he had no idea how their futures would intertwine. The alien princess, still speechless, looked at Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite understand. It was a mix of pain and a kind of resignation that made him wonder how she had ended up there. There were no explanations for how she appeared, or why she had been brought to him. Who am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, like she was trying to remember something very far away. She could hardly speak, but her presence struck Ethan like lightning, leaving him frozen for a moment. He didn't know what to do. He had never been trained to handle something like this. But human life and alien life were now intertwined in a way he couldn't deny. He knew that somehow, this woman, this alien princess, needed him. And maybe he was her last hope. But what else could he do besides try to save her life? What else could he do when the impossible suddenly seemed within reach? Then, in an act of desperation, and maybe courage, Ethan made a decision. He looked into her eyes and whispered, "I'm going to save you. I don't know how yet, but I will." It was the beginning of something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. Ethan didn't know what to expect. Every day at the hospital was a race against time. But nothing had prepared him for the situation he now faced. The alien princess, who he still didn't know what to call, was with him in an isolated room, surrounded by machines monitoring her every breath. The air was thick with palpable tension, and Ethan felt that something was coming, something he couldn't control. She was awake, but still critical. Her breathing was uneven, and her eyes locked onto his with an intensity he couldn't ignore. Those blue eyes, like a limitless sky, didn't just show pain. They held a deep stillness, as if she had seen and lived through things Ethan could never imagine. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice weak but filled with a curiosity that shone through the pain. She tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Ethan motioned for her to stay lying down, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "You're in New York, at a hospital. I'm Dr. Ethan Harris. You suffered serious injuries. You're okay now. You're safe." He said this trying to calm her, though his own voice trembled. He wasn't sure about anything, except that the impossible was right in front of him. She looked at him, confused, and a shadow of despair crossed her eyes. The alien princess didn't fully understand Ethan's words, but seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation. The last?" she whispered, more to herself than to Ethan. But he heard her, and without thinking replied, "The last what?" She looked at him, those deep blue eyes, and for a moment Ethan felt he wasn't just facing an alien woman. He was facing something more, something that could be the key to a future he never imagined. "My people," she began, but was interrupted by a sudden coughing fit. That small moment of weakness made Ethan wince. He helped her sit up carefully. "Stay calm. You need a rest." She seemed like she wanted to say more, but her strength was fading. Her gaze drifted away briefly, and then, with a look of deep sadness, she slumped slightly. "My empire, my race is lost. I'm the last. You must have heard of us. We're from a distant star on the other side of the galaxy. We're doomed." Ethan stayed silent, his mind trying to process everything she had just said. The other side of the galaxy? That was something he had never imagined confronting. What was a woman from another planet doing in a New York hospital? And why did she seem so human? The answers didn't come, but he felt a growing weight on his chest. Something was wrong. She seemed to notice Ethan's confusion, and her expression softened, as if she knew she couldn't force him to understand what was happening. "I'm not from your world, not from your species, but you're the only hope I have," she said, her voice now lower. But it wasn't just that. What she said carried the weight of the sentence. She wasn't simply saying she needed him. She was begging for something he didn't know how to give. The silence between them stretched on, as if the space between their two realities was impossible to cross. Then, a faint vibration began to fill the room, a kind of soft pulse, as if something inside her was reacting to his presence. Ethan tensed. It was like her body was communicating with him in a way he didn't understand. "What's happening?" he asked, more to himself than to her. She looked at him with infinite sadness. "There's something in you that connects me to my people. Something I can't explain. I haven't been the same since I arrived." Ethan tried to make sense of her words, but it was beyond his understanding. What was she saying? Something in him was linking her to her species. But how could he, just a simple doctor, be part of something so unfathomable? And that's when the first threat began to form, without Ethan knowing. Something was watching them. Something that had already started tracking the signs of her arrival on Earth. And it wasn't just a matter of life or death. It was a matter of interplanetary survival. Something far bigger was lurking. But for now, all Ethan could do was stare at the alien princess before him, trying to understand how their lives had become entwined, unaware that she was about to pull him into an abyss of mysteries he never imagined. The following days were a whirlwind of doubt and tension. The alien princess, whom Ethan now knew was called Lyra, remained unstable. Her wounds were healing, but something else was happening, something Ethan couldn't explain. He kept her under constant watch, but the feeling that something much greater was unfolding hung over him. Lyra spent most of her time in silence, staring at the ceiling or into space with those piercing blue eyes, as if waiting for something or someone. Ethan tried to talk to her, but the answers he got were vague, as if she was hiding something or trying to process information beyond her grasp. However, one thing was becoming clearer. Time was running out. Whatever she was, whatever was connecting her to Earth, was beginning to affect her health in ways he couldn't predict. Her heart rate would suddenly spike, and her hands would tremble as if something was taking control of her body. "Lyra, you need a rest. What's happening to you is beyond what I understand." Ethan tried again, now more worried than ever. She turned her head, her deep eyes reflecting the light of the emergency room. "I can't rest, Ethan. I can't, because they're coming." Those words sent a chill down the doctor's spine. They're coming? Who were they? It was the first time Lyra spoke directly about the danger approaching, and her voice was cold, almost emotionless. But there was something in her tone that suggested she knew everything was about to change. Ethan didn't know what to think. How could someone so fragile, someone barely clinging to life, be a threat? Or rather, how could she be in danger from something he still didn't understand? He looked around the room, feeling the pressure mounting. Something was wrong. "Who's coming? You need to tell me," Ethan said, his voice growing urgent. Lyra looked straight into his eyes, and for a brief moment, a shadow of fear crossed her face. "They're like us. They are my enemies. They hunt me. I am the last, and they will come to finish what they started." Before Ethan could ask more, a sudden noise echoed down the hallway, a boom that sounded distant but made the entire hospital shake. The sound was so intense, even the monitors and equipment in the neighboring rooms seemed to react. Lyra shivered in the bed, her eyes wide. "They're already here." Ethan felt a knot twist in his stomach. Everything around him seemed to slow down, but he knew there was no time to waste. He had to act fast. He had to protect Lyra. She was a stranger in a world he never imagined, but she was now in his hands, and he didn't know how far he'd go to keep her safe. The sound of hurried footsteps grew louder in the corridor. They weren't paramedics or nurses. They were heavy, unfamiliar steps. Ethan moved quickly toward Lyra, trying to shield her, but she weakly held up a hand to stop him. "You can't stop what's coming," she said, with a disturbing calm. "They will take me. You can't stop them." Lyra was surrendering to the inevitable, as if she already knew the fate awaiting her. But Ethan, still unsure what to do, refused to believe the battle was lost. He refused to accept that he couldn't save the woman with whom, somehow, he already felt deeply connected. Then the emergency doors burst open with a crash, and two figures dressed in combat gear stormed into the room. They were large and imposing, their dark silhouettes cast against the concrete walls. Ethan barely had time to react before one of them pulled a strange device from their belt and aimed it at Lyra. The sound of an electric hum filled the air, and the woman before him groaned, as if being consumed by an invisible force. Ethan tried to step forward, but the intruders quickly surrounded him. His heart pounded as he tried to process everything happening. He had to do something. He couldn't just let Lyra be taken without a fight. But there was something about the two of them that told him they weren't human. Their eyes, glowing with a strange hue, were anything but natural. "Leave her alone," Ethan shouted, but his voice was drowned out by a wave of energy the enemies unleashed. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if his own energy was being drained by some invisible field. Lyra, her blue eyes locked on Ethan's, whispered a single word he would never forget. "Run." It was too late to run. The enemies closed in, and Ethan knew he had to make a choice, to fight or lose Lyra forever. The pain Ethan felt when hit by the energy wave almost made him pass out. His body, completely paralyzed by the unknown force, wouldn't respond. He felt his muscles locking up, the air growing thin, as if his energy was being sucked away. All he could do was look at Lyra, who, despite her critical state, seemed more alert than ever. She saw Ethan's suffering, and a shadow of despair formed in her gaze. "No," Lyra shouted, her voice gaining strength in a way Ethan hadn't imagined. She rose from the bed, despite the pain and weakness in her body, and with surprising speed, touched Ethan's hand. A brilliant light surrounded them both, a mysterious energy that made the air around them vibrate. The two enemies hesitated, surprise flickering across their faces. But before they could react, the entire room lit up with a pulsing light. And then, the impossible happened. In a desperate move, Lyra unleashed a blast of energy so powerful it shattered the window panes. The force was so intense that the intruders were thrown backward, crashing hard onto the floor. The energy field holding them vanished, and Ethan, finally free, dropped to his knees, gasping, but still alive. "Run now," Lyra shouted urgently, her voice commanding. She knew the battle wasn't over yet, but whatever it was, they had to escape, and fast. But the energy she'd released wasn't enough to completely repel the threat. The enemies were rising quickly, their bodies brimming with strength and advanced technology. They weren't human, and their regenerative abilities were terrifying. Ethan instinctively got to his feet, adrenaline surging through him, and grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her out of the room. He knew there was no time to hesitate. The emergency door burst open with a crash, revealing a passageway. They sprinted down the corridor, hurried footsteps echoing in their ears. Ethan struggled to process everything happening around him. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, and a growing realization. This wasn't just about saving Lyra anymore. He was now caught in something much bigger. When they reached the main hallway, a loud explosion reverberated behind them, followed by gunfire and the sound of metal twisting. The enemies were close on their heels, and Ethan knew there was no turning back. There was no safe place in the hospital, not while these beings were after Lyra. He had a choice: fight or flee. Lyra, stronger than ever, looked at him, her eyes shining with unusual intensity. She knew they were at their limit. Their only chance was to keep moving, but at the same time, something greater needed to be done. "Ethan, listen. I'm not just a princess. I'm a symbol of what's left of my people. I'm the last link between the stars," she said, her voice charged with a power he didn't understand. Those words hit Ethan like a bombshell. He didn't know what they meant, but it was clear Lyra wasn't just some lost woman from another world. She was something more, something he wasn't ready to fully grasp but couldn't ignore. The real battle, he realized, wasn't just about protecting her. It was about both their destinies. "I need you, Ethan," Lyra said, locking eyes with him. "What happens now will change everything." Ethan didn't have time to process what she meant. The sound of heavy footsteps caught up to them, and before he could react, the room beside them was blasted open by a wave of energy. The walls crumbled, and the shadows of their enemies appeared. "Let's go now," Lyra ordered, pulling Ethan with more strength than he thought possible. They ran through the hallways, Ethan feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He didn't know how he could help, but one thing was certain: he wouldn't leave her behind. Now, more than ever, his life was entwined with hers, and there was no turning back. As the chase intensified and explosions echoed throughout the hospital, Ethan felt the urge to fight, but also the burden of doubt. He was just a doctor, but faced with everything happening, he had to be more. For Lyra, for the future. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, subscribe for more stories of intergalactic mystery and romance. The sound of their hurried footsteps echoed through the crumbling hospital corridors. With every second, the tension rose, and the danger grew more imminent. Ethan pulled Lyra along, trying not to lose pace. He felt cold sweat dripping down his forehead, the hot, heavy air of their escape filling his lungs. He no longer knew where they were. He didn't know how far they could run, but he knew he couldn't stop, not now. Lyra was stronger than before, but the enemies were closing in fast. She didn't look tired. In fact, her expression was determined, like she knew exactly what to do next. But Ethan was lost. He wasn't a soldier or a hero. He was a doctor, an ordinary man caught up in something he couldn't understand. Yet despite the fear consuming him, one thing was clear: he couldn't abandon Lyra. They rounded a corner, but a violent explosion knocked them to the ground. The impact was so strong Ethan felt the floor shake beneath him. He got up quickly, heart pounding out of rhythm. He looked at Lyra, who was rising with alarming agility. Her face showed no fear, only focus. She wasn't running away. She was facing something far greater. Ethan glanced around, and the scene was bleak. The hospital, which had once seemed a safe haven, was now a battlefield. It felt like the world was collapsing around them, debris scattered everywhere, emergency sirens mixing with distant screams of people fleeing for their lives. But no one knew what was happening. No one understood what Lyra represented, or what she might mean for Earth's future. "Lyra, what's going on? Who are they? Why are you here?" Ethan asked, breathing heavily as they kept running. The weight of responsibility pressed on him harder than ever. "Lyra, eyes fixed ahead, replied in a steady voice. "They're hunters, Ethan. They won't stop until they find me." She glanced at him briefly, her gaze deepening the worry already swelling in his chest. "I'm the last of my race, the last of my kind. They came to wipe me out and destroy every trace of what's left of my people." Ethan stared at her, stunned. She was the last, the final remnant of an entire alien civilization? This was even graver than he had imagined. Everything around him felt unreal, but he knew there was no room for doubt anymore. He had to protect her, and that meant fighting something beyond anything he could have dreamed. The sound of the alien hunters closing in interrupted him, and Ethan saw Lyra pull something from her suit. It was a strange device, a small metal artifact glowing with a pulsing blue light. He didn't know what it did, but the look on Lyra's face told him it was their only chance. "It's now or never," she said, her seriousness tightening Ethan's stomach. She activated the device, and immediately a series of invisible barriers began to form around them. A dense, strong energy bubble expanded, creating temporary protection. But Ethan knew it wouldn't keep them safe for long. They needed more than that. They needed a plan, a way out. The device's glow faded, and the energy barrier vanished. But when Ethan looked at Lyra, a deep pain settled in his chest. Something was wrong. She was exhausted. The injuries, the energy she used back at the hospital, it all seemed to be taking its toll. She was losing strength, and the impact was becoming visible. Her skin looked paler, her breathing heavier. "Lyra, are you okay?" Ethan asked, moving closer, his concern clear in every word. She looked at him, smiling sadly. "I don't have much time, Ethan. They won't stop until they capture me." Her voice lowered, carrying a weight Ethan didn't fully understand. "I'm the last of my kind, and my people won't be saved unless you do something no one ever has." Ethan frowned, completely lost. "What can I do? I'm not a hero. I'm not any of that." He shook his head, trying to grasp what she was asking of him. Lyra took a step closer, placing a gentle hand over his chest. "You've already done more than anyone else would have. You brought me here, and I can't leave you alone now." She gave a faint smile, not one of relief, but of someone who knew the truth was closing in. "Now, we have to face what's coming. Together." The hunters were getting closer. Ethan had no choice left. He looked at Lyra, his heart pounding, and made a decision. He wouldn't abandon her. Not now. Not ever. Running no longer made sense. It wasn't about escape anymore. It wasn't about fleeing the hunters. The real battle was something else, fighting his own limits and fears pulsing in his mind. But somehow, that began to change when he looked at Lyra. She was exhausted, but her eyes still burned with an intensity that defied everything around her. They'd found shelter in an abandoned building, hiding from the relentless forces tracking them. The silence was deep, but tension weighed heavily in the air. Lyra lay on a makeshift bench, her body worn out and her breath still uneven. Ethan stood nearby, fists clenched, trying to stay calm. The silence stretched for a few minutes until Lyra broke it. "Ethan," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She lifted her head slightly, looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. "I know you're scared. I am too." Ethan looked back at her, feeling a wave of empathy that disarmed him. He didn't know what to think anymore, but something inside him, something deeper, was starting to change. He wasn't just the doctor trying to save a patient anymore. He was part of something bigger, something much bigger. "I don't know what I'm doing, Lyra," he said, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "I'm not a hero. I'm just an ordinary man, a man who somehow got caught up in a story way bigger than I could have imagined." Lyra smiled faintly, as if hearing something he hadn't quite understood yet. "Ethan, you're saving me every day. It's not what you think of yourself that matters. It's what you do." He moved closer and sat beside her. He still didn't have an answer, but those words started to make sense. He was there because he wanted to be, because he felt it was his duty. It wasn't just about saving Lyra or escaping the threat. It was about doing what was right, fighting for something that truly mattered. "You can't do this alone. I can't leave you behind." Lyra looked at him, her blue eyes shining brighter than ever. She said nothing, but she didn't have to. The connection between them, once tangled with doubts and fears, now felt clear and immense. They'd crossed a line. Ethan had become more than a doctor to her. He was her companion, her hope, her refuge. They stayed there for a while, in silence, but now that silence was full of understanding. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring them together, to face whatever was coming, together. Then, without warning, the sound of the hunters echoed through the air. They weren't far anymore. Time was running out again. Ethan stood up quickly, adrenaline flooding back. But this time, something was different. It wasn't panic. It was determination. He looked at Lyra, who was already on her feet, standing tall and ready to fight. "We have to go now," he said with a firm voice. Lyra nodded, and together they took the first steps toward what felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. But now, more than ever, they knew what it meant to be together. It wasn't just survival. It was the promise of a future that wouldn't be defined by hunters, pain, or loss. They would overcome it all, together. The biting wind of a moonless night swept through the corridors of the old subway station, where Ethan and Lyra had taken refuge. The distant sound of the hunters echoed, reverberating off the concrete walls. The tension was thick. They knew they were at their limit. The space was tight, the exits few, and time was running out. Red lights flickered, warning of the imminent arrival of their pursuers. Lyra stood near a wall, her eyes closed in concentration. Ethan knew she was connected to something he still didn't fully understand. Something that might be the key to defeating the hunters, or to their own defeat. He stepped closer, concerned. "Lyra, what are you doing?" She opened her eyes, those intense blues fixed on him with a clarity he'd never seen before. There was a strength inside her, something deeper than simple fear. She took a deep breath and, with surprising calm, replied, "I'm calling the last hope of my people." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what she meant by that, but he knew it was huge. A soft glow radiated from her body, growing stronger by the second. He felt a wave of familiar energy, but far more intense, as if something was awakening inside Lyra. Not just her, but her entire civilization. Suddenly, the ground began to shake, like the planet itself was responding to Lyra's call. The sounds of explosions and gunfire grew closer, but nothing else mattered anymore. The connection between Ethan and Lyra, the bond between human and alien, was about to change everything. Then they heard it. Heavy footsteps. The clang of alien armor striking concrete. It was too late to run. The door Ethan was running toward was blasted open with a devastating impact. Standing there were the hunters, tall, cloaked figures with glowing red eyes set in their metallic faces. They were imposing, relentless. But unlike what Ethan expected, Lyra didn't hesitate. She extended her hand, channeling her energy into a brilliant beam that sliced through the air with terrifying force. The walls trembled from the power she unleashed. "They can't capture me," Lyra shouted, her voice echoing through the tunnel. The hunters, despite their imposing presence, were unprepared for Lyra's power. The beam of energy enveloped her, lighting up the space around them, sending waves of heat that made the air ripple. The hunter's armor began to melt, metal warping under the blast force. But it wasn't just energy Lyra was releasing. It was the strength of a lost civilization, the pain of an extinct race taking its final breath. Ethan felt a deep wave of anguish. He knew what it meant. Lyra wasn't just fighting to save herself. She was fighting to save what little remained of her people. She was risking everything, and the price she'd pay would be steep. "Lyra, stop. You're going to kill yourself," Ethan yelled, running toward her, but she didn't hear him. Her eyes were blinded by the need for vengeance, the need for justice. She was pouring all her energy, everything she had left, into the fight. And Ethan knew if she kept going, there'd be no turning back. In that moment, something inside him broke. He ran to Lyra, grabbing her firmly, trying to make her stop. But she looked at him with an intensity he had never imagined. I have to do this, Ethan. I am the last. I can't let what's left of me be destroyed." He held her tight, his breath heavy, eyes burning with a mix of panic and determination. "Lyra, I'm not going to let you die. Not without me." And in that moment, everything changed. He didn't know how, but he felt something inside him. A power. A connection that transcended everything he knew. As if, somehow, the very essence of the universe was telling him he wasn't alone. Lyra wasn't alone. The energy he felt within himself began to spread, enveloping them both. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew the fight was theirs now. Together, the hunters, now surrounded by the combined energy of Lyra and Ethan, backed away, confused, their armor trembling under the force of their combined power. The battle was far from over, but something had shifted. They were stronger. They had the power to fight. With a final, powerful cry, Lyra unleashed a beam of light that lit up the tunnel, and for a brief moment, the hunters were thrown back, their bodies crashing heavily to the ground. Ethan looked at her, heart racing, eyes full of gratitude. He had never known he could feel something so intense, so real. They had overcome the impossible, but the real fight was just beginning. The sounds of battle finally faded, leaving behind a heavy, deep silence. The tunnel was now in ruins, debris scattered everywhere. Smoke still rose slowly, but the worst was over. The hunters lay defeated, their bodies sprawled around, armor dented and useless. The battlefield was quiet, but the feeling of victory was strange, empty. Ethan and Lyra lay on the ground, gasping for breath, both exhausted and covered in dust and blood. The energy they had released in their fight had completely drained them. Lyra's eyes were closed, breathing uneven. Ethan, despite his own fatigue, couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. He struggled to stand, his head spinning slightly. He looked at her. Lyra was unconscious, but still alive. Her body trembled with exhaustion. He knew the battle was far from over for her. The energy she had released had nearly taken all her life force. He needed to act fast, but what could he do? His heart tightened. He didn't know how, but he knew he couldn't leave her alone now. He moved closer and, with great effort, lifted her up. Her body was warm, but the energy in her pale skin was fading, as if life was draining away. "Lyra," he said softly, almost afraid she wouldn't hear. She opened her eyes slowly, the blue still glowing with a gentle intensity. "Ethan," she whispered, a weak smile curving her lips. "I knew you wouldn't abandon me." He felt a wave of emotion flood his chest. It wasn't just gratitude or relief from victory. It was something deeper, the feeling that, against all odds, he had become part of something much greater. Something he never imagined, but now seemed to be his destiny. Something he no longer wanted to let go of. "You will be okay," Ethan said, his voice slightly trembling. He knew he was lying. She wouldn't be okay for a long time, but he needed to give her something to hold on to. He needed to believe that all of this had a purpose. Lyra smiled a little more, and this time, the smile was full of gratitude. "Ethan," she began, her voice stronger now. "What you've done for me, it's not something I could ever ask from anyone. You've shown me what's possible when two completely different beings come together for a greater cause. I don't even know how to thank you." He held her tighter, feeling more confident than before. It wasn't just about saving a life anymore. It was about saving a world she represented, a world he now felt deep in his bones. Lyra was more than just an alien. She was the last hope of her kind, and now he was as woven into her journey as she was. Lyra sat up with difficulty, her breathing calmer, but there was still a visible weariness in her eyes. Ethan looked around, searching for a way out. They needed to get out of there. They couldn't stay longer in that place, with the hunters defeated, but other threats might still come. "Let's get out of here," he said, helping her to her feet. She nodded, clearly still fragile. As they stepped out into the empty city streets, the world around them seemed to be rebuilding itself, just like them. Everything was quiet, but there was a feeling of renewal in the air, like a new era was about to begin. He didn't know what the future held, but there was one thing he knew for sure. He and Lyra were together, and that was what really mattered. Deep down, he felt this wasn't the end of their journey, just the beginning of something much bigger. The sky was clear, but there was an odd stillness in the air. The scars of battle were still visible on the deserted streets, but somehow everything felt calmer now. The silence wasn't a threat anymore. It was a pause, a moment to reflect, to take in everything they'd been through. Ethan and Lyra sat on a makeshift bench in a plaza that used to be full of life. The world around them seemed to be slowly healing, as if it too was processing the losses and gains that had happened. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky a soft orange, like the universe itself was trying to give them a new color. Ethan watched Lyra, still regaining strength, but more peaceful than he ever thought possible. She had once been a stranger lost in a world she didn't understand. Now, she was his partner, his friend, and more than that. She was the reason he still believed in what once seemed impossible. He looked at her, feeling the weight of everything they'd been through. "I still can't wrap my head around all this," he said quietly, thoughtfully. "How did we even get here?" Lyra smiled gently at him, but her eyes were deep, filled with a wisdom he was only beginning to understand. "We got here because we didn't give up on each other, because we believed there was still something worth fighting for. What you did for me, and what we did together, it changed everything." Ethan felt the warmth of her words, and something inside him stirred. He had risked everything, put himself in danger, and in a way, lost himself. But at the same time, he found something inside that he never knew existed. He wasn't just a doctor anymore. He wasn't the ordinary man he thought he was. He was part of a bigger story, and as hard as it was to understand, he was now willing to do whatever it took to protect what he loved. "Do you really think we can rebuild all this?" he asked, barely expecting an answer. Their world had been shattered, but hope, the connection they shared, felt like something that could endure. Lyra looked toward the horizon, her eyes fixed on the distant stars. She knew what he wanted to hear, but there wasn't an easy answer. There was a lot to do, a lot to rebuild, both in the world and within herself. But in her eyes, there was certainty. They had survived the impossible, and that meant whatever came next, they could face it too. "Nothing will be easy. It never will be. But together we can try," she said firmly, as if sharing a deep truth. Ethan smiled. He felt that, despite all the pain their journey had brought, there was something else now binding them. Something stronger than any obstacle. And maybe that something was what would really make them capable of facing the challenges ahead. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. No matter what happened, he and Lyra would face the world together. And as dark as the night had been, a new light was rising on the horizon. A light they had somehow sparked together. Months passed since the last battle was fought, and the world was finally beginning to heal. The city, devastated by war, was now fertile ground for renewal. The streets, once scarred by destruction, were blossoming again, as if the very earth itself was answering the call to rebuild. Lyra and Ethan, though still recovering, were stronger, more united. Lyra, with her snow-white hair, now walked with more confidence, more certain of her place in this world that had once rejected her. She and Ethan had started a new chapter in their lives, not just as survivors, but as pioneers of a future no one had dared to imagine. Ethan looked out over the city before him, the marks of destruction still visible but conquerable. He felt a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about the grandeur of their victories or the hardships they had overcome. It was about the possibility of something greater, something lasting, something still being built. He turned to Lyra, who stood beside him, her blue eyes fixed on the horizon. "What do you think, Lyra? Can we do this?" he asked, a shy smile touching his lips. She looked at him with a calm smile, but her eyes held a renewed fire, a certainty that their journey was far from over. She met his gaze and said, full of hope, "We made it this far, and together, we'll make it through the rest." And in that moment, they both knew the real battle wasn't just fighting enemies. It was rebuilding what was lost, one step at a time. And despite the challenges, they were ready for whatever came next. The future was still uncertain, but with Ethan and Lyra together, there was unshakable confidence. The love, hope, and courage of two beings from different worlds were now the foundation of something new. Something that couldn't be destroyed because it was built on the strongest bond of all, unity. Thanks for reading this story all the way through. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment and share it with anyone who might be moved by this journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.